everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I'm delighted to be talking to today's guest. It's my favourite topic of ancient history, ancient mysteries, and wow, we've got a veteran of this genre today, because we're going to get into his latest book as well, which is Dead Men's Secrets. We're going to be talking to today's author, Jonathon Gray. A little bit of bio before I bring him on, and I'll get Jonathan to expand on it. He is an international explorer, archaeologist, and author, as I say. Travelled the world many times over in search of data on ancient mysteries. And the past 37 years, he's penetrated some largely unexplored areas too, including the Amazon, leading expeditions to the bottom of the sea and remote mountain and desert regions, covering serious terrain. And of course, all of Jonathan's explorations, the evidence has been surprising but out-of-place artifacts, something Jonathan is specialised in, I believe. According to that, what we've all been taught in school, these are not possible items, they shouldn't even exist, and that they're just isolated anomalies, but we're going to get into why that is so. Global pattern to see then is that these are all suggesting an ancient worldwide civilization of astonishing, gigantic proportions, and something we've covered many times on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have today's guest on the show today to get into this subject, and by a mile, Jonathan has put such a prolific research together on this whole subject. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi Jonathan, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. It's good speaking with you.
Wow, great to have you here live today in New Zealand via Ireland. Wow, we're on opposite sides of the globe here, brother. Jonathan, I guess like everybody, tell me why you get into this whole genre. This is something did you find your answers were lacking to, mysteries that you were seeking? Did you feel the need to collaborate all this data together? Is that why you got into this genre?
Well, as a matter of fact, James, I used to accept the traditional view of history, and in fact, I was about to write a book, on that theme, and so I began my own research independently, and over 30 countries or more, I began to collect information that I thought would be of interest, and I began to find things that I didn't expect, whether it be South America or Asia or Europe, Africa, wherever. Mm-hmm. There came up anomalies, things that, as you mentioned, shouldn't exist. I saw an out-of-place artifact here, an out-of-place piece of knowledge here, and they just didn't fit our traditional view of history. Yeah. So I just pushed them aside because I couldn't include them. They just didn't make sense. But then so many of them began to surface, and I thought, well, wait a minute, what's happening here? There shouldn't be all these things that don't fit our view of history. And so I just stopped the project I was doing. I began looking to see if these were just one or two, or whether there were more of them. And eventually hundreds and thousands of these began to surface. Mm. And this to me was just so compelling. I could not carry on with the traditional view of history. I had to really see why these other things were here. What caused them? How come we've forgotten about them? And a pattern began to develop that if something was found, like ever-burning lights were found in South America, it wasn't just South America, it was Asia, Africa, and Europe and other places. And then I began to look at machinery, ancient medical knowledge, and various subjects began to present themselves until there was so much evidence on each one of them that this required a book of a different nature, totally. And this was the origin of the book Dead Men's Secrets. And this actually took out about 1,000, just over 1,000 of these ancient anomalies. We couldn't just put them all in because it would just be too big. But that's enough to present a strong, solid case that there was a global pattern which was the same worldwide on all continents for ancient knowledge of, it doesn't matter what sphere you go to, the knowledge was there, and a lot of it was put into practice.
Oh, wow, Jonathan. You know, we're going to get into all this, Jonathan. Tell me the bit I don't read about in the bio. Tell me who you are, Jonathan. Are you a passionate guy, a very logical guy? Do you seek mystery, or do you seek the logical and let the mystery happen? I mean, build a picture for the audience, Jonathan.
Yes. Well, of course, when I see a mystery, when I see something that can't be explained, I have an insatiable desire to get to the bottom of it.
Mm.
Like a detective, when he sees things happening that shouldn't be happening, he stops everything and he goes on the trail to see how it happened, where it happened, why it happened, who was involved, and so on. Mm-hmm. And this is how cases are developed by detectives. Now, in archaeology, the same thing exists. We see things that we didn't expect to happen. So, okay, why did they happen? Who did them? Where did they happen? If they got covered up, who did the covering up? Why are we seeing so much opposition to the findings of these things? And this opens up a real can of worms in some directions. So it includes everything. It includes the ancient knowledge. It includes modern suppression. It includes fact and fiction. And I want the facts, not the fiction. I want the answers, not the questions. Each question must be answered, and that's my nature, actually, to find the answers to things. Mm. And if I can't find the answer, then I will not stop until either the answer is not available or else the answer is there. And in most cases, you find the answer if you keep going.
Wow. Yeah, you can hear the passion come through, Jonathan. Well, Jonathan, there's so many books you have written now. It's quite a long endurance seeking of the truth that you've gone through. And like I say, a lot of people would, focus on the cover-up, or a lot of people would focus on the ancient technology or ancient spirituality or ancient civilization, and that's fine. I mean, that's great. Jonathan, you have covered the spectrum here. It's prolific, the work that you have done. I mean, great to have you on the show today. What would be the main genre that you would find excites you the most, or the one genre that you think is the most revelation? What appeals to you to most? What one has the biggest revelation, or what one, or can you even say that?
Well, I would say that today the attempts to cover up and destroy evidence is what gets me passionate about it, because there are big institutions of learning, and I'm going to name one, the Smithsonian in the United States.
Oh yeah,
has at least a dozen large museums scattered across the country, and the founder of the Smithsonian actually was an honest man who was so excited about the past that he just wanted to gather all the physical evidence he could and present it to the public just as it was, and let it go where it has to go, and not with any theories behind it, but if something is found, we'll just put it there. And he was a very honourable man, and he built up a great reputation for the Smithsonian as a wonderful institution of learning and of displaying that learning to the public. But this later on was hijacked by a group of men who had an agenda. And they then said, okay, we want to prove our point to the public, and to do so we will invent things if we have to, and we'll destroy other things that go against it if we have to. Mm-hmm. And this is now the sad story of such a wonderful institution that has gone bad.
Wow. Well said, Jonathan. Well said. Jonathan, what I love about your work is how you assimilate the data, because it's a very convoluted story, that of the human, the humans on this planet. It's a very mixed bag. There's like you say, there's like geographical information, astronomical information, mathematical, metallurgical. It just keeps on going. It's like, how do you assimilate that data? But I like the way you've done that, Jonathan. You've categorized it in a way that's, needed. How do you go about the complexity of the data that you're looking at? Because it's very, very wide.
Yes. Well, when I find something, in the back of my mind always is, how am I going to share this? Half of the joy of finding something is when you know that there are going to be lots of people out there whose lives are going to be helped, and they're going to be excited, they're going to be They're going to enjoy the knowledge, and I guess I get more joy out of sharing it with others than of just keeping it to myself. You just keep something to yourself, and well, what's it worth? But when you find that other people get their answers, well, this makes it all worthwhile to me. I can go to bed at night saying, okay, I've done some good in the world today.
Wow. Okay, John, let's talk the biggest thing, we can talk some artifacts and some specifics in a moment, but I guess the big question of all, if we have this vanished civilization, or we've had technology go down in the past, the big question is, what happened to them? Do we have a time frame?
Oh, yes, we do. And I should mention that I've produced 2 books on the big dating blunder, which is persistent around the world. Our traditional dating methods are just like the traditional history. They're both outdated and they're both wrong. Mm-hmm. So the dating has to be revised according to evidence. Now, the greatest evidence that we have is not from dating of artifacts by carbon dating. Carbon dating is only reliable up to 3,500 years. And that is actually testified by the man who gained a Nobel Prize for his carbon dating discovery. He said you cannot go back with certainty beyond the first dynasty of Egypt. So that's about 4,000 years.
Wow.
Now, likewise, all of the radiometric dating systems are dependent upon certain assumptions, and those assumptions have now been falsified. And yet the books all go back and say, 40,000 years ago, the Aborigines were in Australia. And 100,000 years ago, this person was doing this in Africa, and so on. I now am prepared to declare, without fear of being successfully contradicted, that all those datings are nonsense. The furthest we can go back is correctly stated by Libby, who was involved in the carbon dating, and he said that you cannot go back with certainty beyond the first dynasty of Egypt. Anything else is speculation. Human records only go back about that far too, a little bit further. And when you go to human records, you have eyewitness reports, and that's much more reliable than something that we guess at by something that is not sustainable as far as scientific dating is concerned. Now, as far as a master civilization, a worldwide civilization goes, there's very good evidence from 12 independent dating methods now that don't rely upon radiometric dating, which all agree that there was a worldwide wipeout in the year 2345 BC, which went on for about 12 months and ended 2344 BC, and after that we have the civilizations of Sumeria, China, Egypt, Indus Valley, and so on, and the American civilizations rising. These are all since that date. And that can be proved beyond any reasonable doubt. Then after this, these civilizations actually were germinated from by the descendants of the survivors of that worldwide civilization that was wiped out. And they echoed in their accomplishments many of the accomplishments of the pre-disaster world, the original world. However, because of man-made wars, including nuclear war, yes, in the past, and natural disasters, natural and man-made disasters, destroyed these post-flood civilizations. Those that were not directly destroyed gradually went down. Let me put it this way. If the civilizations of Europe and the United States were destroyed today, the rest of the world, their civilization would go down. Because it is the leaders of civilization that have the greatest technology, who are the ones that keep the whole world civilization level higher. But you take away the major players, the rest of them who are not experienced to the same extent, that they will deteriorate as time goes by. And so Egypt went down. Egypt wasn't wiped out. It just went down. And the same with all the surviving civilizations that weren't destroyed by man-made and nuclear disaster and natural disaster. So the surviving civilizations that were not destroyed deteriorated over time, and that's been the history of the human race. And today we're up again. We're just rediscovering what was lost.
Wow. Of course, well, let's focus on the flood. Regardless of what date the actual flood was, can we safely say something like a comet has come in, melted the ice caps, created global floodings, or a series of cataclysms? Would that be the best guess for the cataclysm?
As an outside force would be necessary to tilt the Earth's axis, and there's evidence that this took place at that time. And an ice comet is a very good possibility as a flyby, not necessarily hitting the Earth, but as a flyby, and the tilting of the Earth's axis from an outside force such as that would have produced tremendous strain and friction within the crust of the Earth, and this would have caused huge cracks. Like we've got the Great African Rift, for example, as an example, or one of those great cracks to form in the surface of the Earth, and huge amount of volcanic magma and also water pouring out from the heart of the Earth onto the surface, and collapsing also a protective canopy that did exist around the Earth at the time, such as exists around Venus now. And this was collapsed at the same time. So water came down, water came from underneath, and volcanic eruptions, of course, do produce an enormous amount of water. Mount Etna in Italy, just one single volcano produced 1/4 of a cubic mile of water in a month.
Wow. Yeah,
and when you have 30,000 volcanoes doing this, you've got a worldwide disaster, a water-laid disaster, from above, from below, and from the Earth itself.
Sure. Yeah, I know from this part of the world where I'm at that we have that mid-Atlantic ridge, which geology doesn't seem to be able to explain it in any, or even attempt to. And didn't the ancient cultures also have the references to the firmament, the sky being different?
Yes, they did. They certainly did. And this was like a shield which protected the Earth from harmful cosmic rays. It would let in the healthful benefit rays from the sun, those of that frequency, but it kept out the dangerous ones, which was wonderfully. The Earth was beautifully balanced. And when the underground water basins erupted through the cracks that had appeared in the crust as a result of the tilting of the Earth, and the whole Earth was shaken, the force, the pressure of that pent-up water went miles into the sky and penetrated and perforated the protective canopy, and this collapsed over about a 6-week period, and then the flood continued right through the year. But this was huge. It was enormous. It was not just an ordinary rising of water. Continent and seas were all churned up together. Everything was topsy-turvy. Forests went down. Cities were destroyed. Everything became lost and destroyed. And this is big. And it's the most widespread racial memory of mankind, James. There are 600 racial legends around the world in all languages, 600 of them which all agree as to this great disaster.
Yeah, you know, there was recently, I think about 6 months ago, in the west of Ireland, where I'm at, Jonathan, they have found some strange black silted layer of mud, most likely flood material that has buried some ancient city, like a megalithic, somewhat living quarters too, and they don't know what to make of it. That's just rolled in about 6 months ago. That.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, of course, I think they attribute a 4000 BC date to that only on the back of it possibly being megalithic, and they can't really date it. So, you know, dating is always going to be a problem, though, Jonathan. Do you think perhaps that these megalithic, particular Europe, Stonehenge, Orkneys, Brittany, all this, Ireland, all these, there seemed to be an obsession with the measuring of the Earth, like geodetic measurements. Do you think these guys were trying to find the new tilt of the Earth, or trying to get it right again? Oh,
yes, I most certainly do. Stonehenge actually was used for that purpose, and it was just one of many, many places all over all over the world actually, that had a similar shape and purpose. But Stonehenge is about the best preserved in the world. It gives us a lot of clues.
Hmm. In that respect, on a wider megalithic civilization, or when we have all cultures around the world, particularly the megaliths, we seem to have guys using stone and earth and henges and mud, low-tech material, but high-tech knowledge encoded in it. If these guys had lost themselves in a high civilization or flooding or a high culture, they had the brains, they had the goods upstairs, but, they had like low-level materials. Do you think that would explain the majority of the intentions of these cultures too?
Oh, yes, James, most certainly. Just suppose our cities were destroyed today. Mm. Now, 1,000 years' time, archaeologists come along, and they see the growth of nature has come and choked the ruins and the remains. And by the way, if an atomic blast destroyed all our major cities, it would leave behind ruins, and these ruins, like railway lines, for example, would eventually decay and just be rust blowing in the wind, so that those railway lines would disappear. Our motor cars, our television sets, our computers, our hair dryers, whatever you like, things made of plastic and iron and whatever, would deteriorate and then become nothing, and they would not even survive a destroyed civilization. The only material, and even the skyscrapers would no longer exist. They could not survive it, because the only material that can survive a dead civilization is stone. And stone, suppose the archaeologists came into the middle of London, mm-hmm. They would probably see nothing much. But when they went into the suburbs, they would see stone axes and things like that, and or any parts of buildings in London or anywhere, Dublin, anywhere you like, mm-hmm. that would be partly of stone. The stone would remain, and everything else would be gone. The glass, the plastic, the steel, everything would be gone. It would deteriorate. That's how nature deals with these things. But mm-hmm. stone survives. Mm. And we would look in as an archaeologist and say, here were some Stone Age people. They worked in stone. That's all they had. Now, of course, the survivors would go bush. Now, the survivors may have the knowledge. You might have a computer technician, and you might have a building construction worker, and so on. All these people would say, okay, we know what we used to do, but we've haven't got much now to work with, so we'll work with what's easy, and that will be stone as well, stone and wood. Mm-hmm. And Stonehenge, of course, is a good example of that. And, of course, stone does, especially stone with crystals in it, does attract electricity and can be used for different things. Mm. It was very appropriate that Stonehenge was made the way it was at that time.
For sure. Jonathan, let me bring in the ancient alien hypothesis for the moment, because I know you just have a chapter on that in the book. Did space giants experiment with us? That's a really great way of putting it. There's people out there, they want the ancient aliens to have done everything, and we got all this information from them. And then you got people that don't like that theory. They want it tweaked a bit. They want to be a bit of inhuman ingenuity in there in the partnership. And then there's people saying it was pre-flood, and then we got tampered with, and it's a mixed bag. How do you feel about that? The ancient alien hypothesis? Do you address that?
It's totally unnecessary. The reason for it is this: that today, with the history the way it is taught in the controlled system, mm-hmm. is that man was dumb in the past. For millions and millions of years, he was ascending from a brute beast with no intelligence and no ability. And then suddenly, just a few thousand years ago, we find him with the highest technology, able to fly and talk across the earth and do all sorts of things. And this seems impossible, that after millions of years of very slow, almost no progress, suddenly we find him at the top, not at the bottom. Just suddenly, all of a sudden. And so, naturally, because the evolution theory cannot explain such an apparent anomaly in its theory, where can we go? Oh, yes, there must have been an outer space technology that came and was brought to Earth, and that was brought to the ape-like creatures, and suddenly they became modern men. That's the theory. But you don't need to go off this planet for intelligence. Well, let me put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
If evolution cannot occur on this planet, and therefore it can't explain the sudden technology burst just a few thousand years ago, all you're doing is you're removing the problem to another planet. And so now you have to explain it. If evolution can't do it here, then evolution couldn't do it there. So how on earth did they get it? Oh, maybe another civilization brought them their one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where's the end to this? It's a theory that doesn't make sense.
Mm.
And it makes more sense to realize that according to the laws of genetics, the laws of genetics today tell us that we do not increase information into our DNA. All we do is we use the DNA information that has been handed on to us by our ancestors. Evolution cannot produce information. No way. Mm-hmm. That's scientifically so, and any geneticist will agree with that. So, by extrapolation, this means that in the beginning, man always had that information. And this, of course, is what we're told in the biblical writings, that man was always intelligent. Our ancestors, going all the way back to the beginning, have always been intelligent. What brings civilizations down is man-made or natural disasters, and we're responsible for a lot of those.
Wow.
And so the extraterrestrial theory is unnecessary. Not only is it unnecessary, but it doesn't fit with the genetic evidence.
Okay. So, Jonathan, let's talk a couple of specifics. Throw me out maybe 3 of your most favourite interesting artifacts and why they're so mysterious and what they indicate.
Okay.
Maybe just 3 of the top ones.
Yes. All right then. Well, what about, if you count it as an artifact, we have tunnels, great tunnels that have been built in the past several thousand years ago,
Mm-hmm.
tunnel systems that go for hundreds of miles on every continent.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but they're smooth, glassy surfaces as though they were cut by a laser beam. There's no rubble outside the entrances from which all the stuff dug out of the tunnels could be put. It looks like the tunnels were melted into place, and some kind of machinery, maybe laser machinery, was used to just zoom into the ground below the surface of the ground and just keep on tunneling and tunneling and tunneling. All of that rubble that came out was not put anywhere. It's just like it vanished. And the tunnel systems were very sophisticated in their construction, and they go for hundreds of miles. And you can go down into some of them. I've been down into 3 of them, and with my wife. And you can have doors shut behind you automatically. And as you approach some tunnels, lights just come on suddenly. And as you go past a certain area, the lights go off behind you. This shows very sophisticated construction techniques.
Wow. Incredible. Incredible. You got another couple of examples?
Oh, yes. Why don't we look at the big stone blocks? Now, the largest stone blocks ever have now been found just recently, actually, and of all places, up in Russia.
Wow.
The largest stone megalithic ruins in Russia, the largest blocks of stone ever discovered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, the location of these is Mount Shuria down in southern Siberia.
Yeah.
And some of the gigantic granite stones are estimated to weigh each stone more than 3,000 tons. 3,000 tons per stone.
Okay.
Now, the largest stone found at the megalithic ruins of Baalbek in Lebanon, which are very famous now, the largest stone there is 1,500 tons. So how in the world did someone cut 3,000-ton stones with extreme precision, transport them up the side of a mountain, and stack them 130 feet high above the ground into buildings?
Incredible. Incredible.
We do not have any cranes or combination of cranes that can handle such heavy weights today, nor do we have means to transport them. No train in the world would be capable of transporting such heavy stones. The wheels would be crushed on the rails.
Wow. I know Dr.
This is a task which they did, but we can't.
Sure. I know Dr. Valery Uvarov made that expedition for that, and I believe he's going to go back for a second run. So it's all eyes on that. I've had the pleasure of meeting Valery in Bosnia. Very interesting guy. So all eyes on that one for another research trip. Have you got any mechanical or technical devices that you want to talk about?
Yes. There are some ancient... now, this is a toss-up between different things. Also in Russia, actually, have been found what appears to be the remains of ancient electronics.
Wow.
We've got little devices that are being found which are definitely human. Yes, definitely human, of human construction.
Wow. And
some of them can only be seen in their detail under a microscope. And these have been studied by the University of Leningrad and Helsinki and various other places and declared to be human made. They've been found by gold miners actually digging down way under the ground, and they're coming up and sifting stuff. They found these, and they actually are a spiral in shape, a series of spirals like a coil, and so small that they're like little pieces you put in computers to make computers work.
Incredible. Do we know any antiquity on the dating of any of this, Jonathan?
Datings, of course, are not reliable, as I mentioned,
sure.
But putting it into the focus of the timing of the world disaster, and I mentioned that there were 12 ways of confirming and reconfirming and cross-checking the date. It's the one big date that is pretty securely fixed now. This would mean that in the last 4,500 years, these would have had to be made, and very likely in the earlier part of the 4.5, around about 2000 BC is my estimate, simply based upon the fact that the most reliable event in history to be dated is that great disaster now.
Sure.
But and that's been done independently by scientists in different countries. So I'd say around about 2000, give or take a few hundred years either side, 2000 BC to 1000 BC in that period.
Wow. Do you think then perhaps, first of all, incredibly interesting time on the planet, about 2,500, 2000 BC. I mean, we have all these civilizations popping up, China, Egypt, the Olmecs in Mexico. We have the megalithic builders popularizing their monuments. Seems to be India again, the Vedic civilization. You have all these civilizations, or pockets of them, dotted all around the globe, popping up at the same time. It begs answers, Jonathan. It just begs answers. And let's bring in the Mercury, because I believe Mercury was found under a pyramid in Mexico recently, and it just screams commonalities with the Chinese monuments.
Yes. And Mercury, of course, was spoken about in some of the ancient writings of different countries as being a fuel source that could be used in air transport.
Incredible. We're talking a sophisticated science here, Jonathan. We're talking something incredibly sophisticated. I mean, do you think that these guys were located on one part of the globe, and that's why, it was easy to wipe them out, or maybe just a couple of pockets? Do you have a location for this source civilization?
This civilization, I do believe, James, was global, worldwide. Whenever we see evidence, for example, of Mercury, we see it in where you mentioned, we see it in various other parts of the world, and then where we don't see it physically, we see in little capsules, we see it written about. And this would go for ever-burning lights, for various medical procedures, for various construction methods, and types of machinery and so on, that there was a similarity, and the similarity is a bit like today. We have similar shaped computers today, no matter whether you're in Ireland or New Zealand or Japan. There's a sharing worldwide, and this looks to have been the practice back there in the past as well.
Jonathan, I mean, let's take the focus off artifacts for a moment. Let's look at the emergence of these cultures, civilizations, these pockets that the survivors set up camp again. What we see is the very earliest sources of civilization, all being very, very sophisticated societal structures at the very, very start. The structure of society is incredibly advanced, and it's not just advanced in one or two areas. We see in Sumeria, for example, sophisticated on so many levels. You might find one or two civilizations being greatly, articulate in astronomy, or one articulate in its military might, or one being, they develop a role in one aspect, astronomical, political, military. Look at ancient Sumeria. I mean, to be sophisticated on all its levels, how can archaeology just ignore that, Jonathan?
Well, archaeology should not be ignoring it, James. It's interesting. If you're taking Sumeria, for example, there are historians and archaeologists who use words like astonishing or extraordinary, a flame which blazed up so suddenly, the astonishingly short period with which in which it arose, there's one fellow, I think it's Joseph Campbell, he said, with astonishing abruptness there appears in this little Sumerian mud garden the whole cultural syndrome that since constituted the germinal unit of all the great civilizations of the world. So what we've got here is a civilization in Sumeria that came out of nowhere. The earth was turned to mud. Out of that mud came a high civilization at the top, not at the bottom. And then you could look at Egypt. Just take a look at Egypt. Egypt sprang up into existence suddenly, fully developed. That is, without transition from a primitive state, with a fantastic, ready-made high society. And look at the few examples maybe we can think of. Great cities, enormous temples, pyramids of overwhelming size, colossal statues with tremendous expressive power, luxurious tombs, and great streets flanked with magnificent sculptures, perfect drainage systems, a ready-made writing already perfected, a well-established naming system in which the pharaohs had as many as 5 names at the very start, and society already divided into specialist classes, civil service, army, everything minutely organized, and courts exhibiting all the indications of a well-defined precedence and form. So it seems that in the remotest period of which there are records, Egypt shows a level of civilization that's inexplicable, unless it came as the result of knowledge that had been preserved when the world civilization before it was wiped out. It's interesting that Egypt and Sumeria and the Indus Valley and these others all came up around the same time, all of them at the top. Not one of them had to evolve upward.
Incredible, Jonathan, incredible. You mentioned the Smithsonian before. Do you perhaps look at the major controversy there with the suppression of what people believe was a race of giants, that these articles from the surfacing from all the different newspapers, there might be something to that, Jonathan?
Oh, yes. I can't remember the figure, and I'd like to be pardoned if I give the wrong figure, but in my mind it's something like about 10,000 examples of ancient giants in North America have been destroyed. A wholesale destruction of giant remains was destroyed. And I could go into some specific stories on this, but I also made a claim from information that I had that the Smithsonian actually hired a ship, loaded it with artifacts that disagreed with its theories, and told the captain and his team, dump these artifacts in a deep part of the Caribbean Sea. And the ship went out and it dumped a whole shipload of artifacts. Now, these artifacts were the result of years and years of work by lots and lots of archaeologists. But that didn't matter to the people in the Smithsonian. They said, dump it all, and then come back empty. Don't bring them back. Now, I made that claim actually on air some time ago, and I had emails from people. One of them was a man who said, I was a crewman on that boat. This actually did happen. Another man said, I was a tugboat captain. And he said, I can give you, I've kept actually a manifest. He said, if you're interested, then I can supply it when I get back to home sometime. And I can give name and date and address and location and name of the tugboat company. This is all very genuine. The Smithsonian did dump a whole boat full of artifacts to get rid of them.
No. You know, I often talk to people, and not just that case, but I mean many cases. Michael Cremo is a great example for showing knowledge filtration system, for example. But, you know, people have this innate ability to ask the wrong question. They say, well, why would anybody sanitize history like that in a deliberate attempt? I don't look at it like that, Jonathan. Unlike you, I look at the right questions first, saying, well, did it happen? Why did it happen? Was it true? What's the facts of the situation? Look at the history and ask the right questions, and then worry about what the analysis of it is later. But people just have this filter of going, well, why would anybody do that? So it never happened. You know, what is it about this psychosis that's out there, Jonathan?
All right. You know, I'm going to open up. I'm going to throw a cat among the pigeons here, James. But
sure.
I have to speak the truth. You've asked me, and I've got to be straight about it.
Please.
In 1859, Charles Darwin put out his theory. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of Christian people had been hypocritical in their ways. They were preaching, but they weren't living the life, and this turned off Darwin. His father actually was an Anglican vicar, I understand, or worked in the church anyway. And because people looked at you've got Christianity as Jesus Christ gave it, and he is known as a perfect example of how all people who call themselves Christians ought to live, and that's the kind of thing. It's a life, not a religion. And yet others have made it into religion where you can preach and pray and do what you like during the week. Doesn't matter what you do wrong. Now, Darwin was turned off by that, and so he just veered away. He went to the other extreme. He wanted to disprove that there was a God, and so he wanted to show that everything had come on its own. And so he produced what we now know as Darwinian evolution. Mm-hmm. And the Smithsonian hijackers actually were espousing that theory, and they were determined not to give anything at all that would prove the biblical view of history true, but rather the evolutionary Darwinian theory true. And so if you go to their museums today, you'll find made-up statues that have never existed in real life, but they show, they start at the ape and they finish up with an upright man, and all the in-between things are made up, trying to show that there have been no missing links, everything's in place, mm-hmm. When that's not so at all. Mm. And today, if you go into a university, I was just speaking with a university professor. He said, if you go into the university and you try to talk about everything being beautifully designed and created, and man being intelligent in the past, you will not you'll be sacked. If you're a professor and you start saying that, you'll be sacked. Or you'll be, with all the grants for your research will be withdrawn, mm-hmm. and your name may be vilified, because they can't stand anything that will oppose the Darwinian evolution theory. And this is the problem. It's a very hot seat. It's a very emotional issue for lots of people. And their livelihood, their reputations, they've been preaching it for years, and suddenly somebody comes along and says, hey, wait a minute, these artifacts prove that's not so. And so they say, out with you. We don't want to talk about it. And the stranglehold on of the evolutionary theory upon the present education system is a scandal. That's the reason why.
Yeah. Wow, incredible, Jonathan. Nice to hear that from, and well articulated. A lot of people refer to Darwinism as the Church of Darwin, and I often use that, and I don't actually mean that in a derogatory way, Jonathan. It really is like a Church of Darwin. It's almost like a living mythos, this mythology that they have created, and they're so fixated on it. Oh
yes, it's a religious frenzy that they've gone into.
Yeah,
if I might use the word frenzy.
Yeah, a religious frenzy.
Because they're making definite statements about religion and about God, and that's a type of religion on its own.
And it's one that has no sign of changing anytime soon, Jonathan.
No, they're set, and they're going to try to stifle opposition. Now, let me tell you about a girl called Lisa from New Zealand here.
Mm-hmm.
She was travelling the world, and she was, of course, trying to get little jobs here and there in every country that she was visiting as a tourist. And she ended up in, I think it was the New Mexico State Park area, and she was given a job. And each day they were excavating in an area there in that parkland, and they came across these huge skeletons, about 12 feet long. Human. And immediately the boss of the operation said, well, now you must not take any pictures, you must not bring your cameras into your work, you must not let anybody outside know what you're working on. In fact, they began searching them as they came in and searching them as they went out every day.
Wow.
And eventually they called in one of the scientific institutions, and they brought in the army. They brought in soldiers. And they confiscated all these things. And the whole place was closed down. So there were people involved in the whole chain of commands in different categories that got involved, and somebody in there said, okay, we've got to close this down. And Lisa had a lot of trouble leaving the USA. She was cross-questioned so much because it was on her record that she had been there.
That's incredible, Jonathan. This sanitization seems to have a very sinister, one can go the conspiratorial route too, Jonathan. There's a very sinister clandestine motive behind this whole thing.
Oh, yes, yes. I know a man over in Queensland, Val Osborne. Now, he was an amateur archaeologist, and he was up in the North Queensland area in Serena. Serena's a little sugar country town where they grow a lot of sugar around there. And on the coastline, he began to find things that really interested him. He began to find the remains of an old harbour, shipping harbour. And the wharves and slag areas and tombs and parts of houses and statues and inscriptions were Phoenician, from the Phoenicians, from the Middle East.
Wow. And
so he worked for 20 years documenting this photographically and in other ways. Then he went to the Serena Shire Council, who was like the local government authority, and they started collecting the evidence, hoping that this could become a tourist attraction. Then he was encouraged to go to the media, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and he went on television on the 6 o'clock news, which is prime time that everybody across the country watches. And he told about his discovery. Immediately, it was either the South Queensland University or the Central, I think it was the South Queensland University, said to one of their staff, and they gave him $10,000 as an incentive. They said, you go up there, stay there for a few days, then come back, and we'll take you to the media, and you're going to say that there's nothing up there, that you've investigated it, and that this man is not reporting truly. So this person was interviewed on television the following week, And he was introduced on television as an archaeologist, when in reality he was only an art teacher.
Wow.
And as a result of that, Val Osborne was discredited on the ABC. Everything that he had said was wiped under the carpet.
Shocking. Well, Jonathan, I want to just, we've got the top of the hour. I just want to make sure, do you some justice here. Can you please give us out your website where the listeners can follow along and catch your work as well, Jonathan?
Oh, thank you, James. Yes, it's www.beforeus.com. I'll just spell that out. BEFOREUS.com.
Wow. Simple and descriptive. Beforeus.com. You know, you speaking about the Phoenicians there, Jonathan, these guys were incredible master mariners. People have no idea just how good these Phoenicians were. I don't, when I look at these guys, I mean, they descended from, you know, these special trees that they brought down from the Lebanese mountains, and then when they made their ships, with this special, what was the name of the red tree? I forget the name of it now. But when they made their ships, they were master.
I'm sorry, the cedar tree.
Yeah, cedar tree, yeah. When they brought that cedar tree down from the Lebanese mountains and they made their ships, I mean, they took to the seas. They dominated the seas, Jonathan. I have no problem accepting these guys in Canada where they reckon they were copper mining. Nobody even explains where the Bronze Age got its copper ore from. And we've got copper ore missing in Canada.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, they were coming across to Canada. They were going to South America. They were right across the Pacific here, too.
It's an incredible journey these guys are on, but when you look at who these guys were, I mean, they wouldn't have been telling people they were there, Jonathan. They would have protected they were miners and they were merchants. I mean, these guys were, like, in that time frame, these guys were on top of their game. You know, these guys weren't letting any secrets out. I mean, they wouldn't have exactly spread the knowledge of where their sources were from. But make no mistake that these guys could take the open seas.
Well, actually, what you say, James, is quite correct. In fact, about keeping their trade routes secret, there is on record the fact that when the ships went out through the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Gibraltar Strait, and they were coming up to Britain, they saw a foreign ship, I think it was a Roman ship or some ship from another country following them. And so the captain said to them, "We have to scuttle our ship so that they will not know our destination. It's better to lose the ship than to lose the trade."
Wow.
And they did.
Wow. That's diehard. That's diehard right there, Jonathan. Wow.
Yeah.
Jonathan, of course, we talked about the ocean. Yeah, we mentioned at the start in your biography about underwater archaeology. Let's focus a little bit on that, Jonathan. Tell me some of the work you've done there and why you take to underwater.
Oh, well, one of the most interesting finds, actually, is a find in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aqaba, in which I've personally been involved and had teams of scientists with us. And as a matter of fact, I have an artifact from it only about 1 yard away from where I'm sitting as I talk to you, James, right now in my office here. Now, in the book of Exodus, we have the story of Moses, and I know Hollywood made a great movie, The Ten Commandments, of this, starring Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner. And the Exodus story says that the Hebrew slaves were in Egypt, and Moses was commissioned to lead them out of Egypt to freedom, and they were pursued by the Egyptian army. And Josephus, the historian, says that in the Egyptian army there were 250,000 footmen plus hundreds of chariots, probably thousands of charioteers, all armed to bring back the fleeing Hebrew slaves. Now, the slaves came down, according to the description given in that book. They went through an area surrounded by mountains, and they eventually came to a large flat beach by the sea. And both sides, the mountains, north and south of there, the mountains came down and would block their route north or south, and so they could only go east, and eastward was the sea. Behind them was the canyon they'd come out of, and Pharaoh's army came along in through that canyon behind them, and they were trapped. I'm just wondering whether that's the origin of the expression between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Wow.
Anyway, the story, as we all know, goes that the sea was miraculously opened and they escaped across. And when Pharaoh's army came across after them, the sea came back, and the pharaohs, including Pharaoh himself, actually was drowned. If this was so, we should find on the bottom of the seabed there the remains of chariot parts and chariot wheels and skeletal parts of horses and men. A fellow that I went out to disprove, but eventually ended up proving him correct, claimed that he had found chariot parts down there. So I took my own expeditions down, and we went down, and quite a number of times actually, and I had some of the world's best divers on my team, but from Britain and from Israel. And we found the remains of parts of horses, chariot wheels, chariot cabs, axles, and so on. And I have part of a chariot wheel right here sitting beside me. Scattered all over the seabed, everything mixed up. And precisely as the book of Exodus says, this is exactly what we found.
Wow. I think we definitely don't understand the Bible in many aspects. I know biblical archaeology has turned up some many interesting finds. The Dead Sea Scrolls, again, another interesting modern discovery as well. But in ancient times, and maybe this is not in a religious sense, in a spiritual sense, look at cultures like ancient Egypt, probably the best example. I mean, people say they were obsessed with the dead. However, they were also scientific about the role of death and life, and they didn't really distinguish between the two. It was all afterlife and all orientated like that. But do you think that these guys were, and of course we can talk about the pre-flood as well, but the origins of this civilization and all these pockets of civilization, they were spiritually advanced, unlike us today, Jonathan, where we maybe have some technology, but we've lost our spiritual way. And do we need that to understand this technology?
Yes, we do. I do believe we do. And the problem with civilizations that were wiped out by mankind is that they had retained their intellectual ability, but they had lost their spiritual direction. And when you have the knowledge of nuclear physics, for example, that can be used for the benefit of mankind, or it can be used for man's destruction. And because the human morals had gone down and didn't match any longer the intellectual ability, a disaster came. Our spiritual awareness, our spiritual standing must be kept healthy, the same as everything else, body and mind. And this is where today our modern society is failing. The spiritual is being neglected or considered not to be important.
Wow. I want to mention the Ark of the Covenant. This is incredibly interesting to many. There's many books on it, many documentaries on it. People talk of being a technological voice. Some say it talked to God. People describe it as a capacitor. People say it had radiation. There seems to be wars over it and people fighting for this technology. From your research, what do you think of the Ark of the Covenant? What's your best good instinct of what this thing was, how it was treated, where it is now, maybe a description of it?
Okay. Very interesting subject. The Ark of the Covenant, actually, our primary source of information for the Ark of the Covenant is the Bible. And it's reliable because it's eyewitness testimony as to the construction of it, who actually oversaw the construction, the description of the material. It was made of acacia wood, which is a wood of the desert of Arabia, which was coated in gold. And it was a box. Ark in the Old Hebrew means two things. It can mean a boat, which it did in Noah's Ark time, or it can mean a box. In both cases, it means a container. And this was a box, an oblong box. And the word covenant referred to the Ten Commandments. Now, when the Ten Commandments were written on tables of stone, they were to be placed inside the Ark of the Covenant. And it was a spiritual artifact, probably the most valuable artifact that's ever been constructed, but had a spiritual message in it. Moses was told that this actually was a symbol of the throne of the universe, from which the Creator rules the universe. And that when he constructed this and put it in the tabernacle in the desert there, and when later on it went into Solomon's temple when that was built, that this was to be a symbol of man's problem and God's answer. We have all violated the spiritual laws of the universe, and which are written and summarized in the Ten Commandments. If you use those Ten Commandments, our national laws are based upon the laws of Ireland and Britain and France and Germany and New Zealand and Australia and America, are all based on those Ten Commandments. They're the basis of our civilization. And they were placed inside the ark, inside the box, as a symbol that this is the divine law for the universe, and we've broken it. We've all violated it. And we can't help ourselves, because cutting ourselves off from the life giver means that we die. And his answer, the Creator's answer, is that he wants us to live. And there can be redemption. There can be rescue from death. And so someone would have to take our place. May I illustrate this by what an Indonesian judge did the other day from an email I got from Indonesia. A woman had stolen. She'd broken the law. And she was hauled before the judge and fined a huge amount of money for stealing. And she broke down and says, "Look, I'm a poor widow. All I was doing was stealing food for my children." He said, "Well, you go to prison. But who's going to look after my children?" He said, "Well, I can't do that. I can't help you. But the law says that this must be paid." However, what he did then, he threw off his robe, he stepped off the podium, he went down to her, opened his wallet, gave her the fine, and then says, now come and pay me the fine." He got back up there, and as judge, he put on his judge's gown, she paid the fine, and she went free. And according to the Bible, that's what the Creator would do for us. He could pay the fine. He represents the law. He would come down. He would suffer. He'd take our penalty and die, but rising again, he would offer us rescue beyond the grave, so that we could eventually live forever. Now, that's what the Ark of the Covenant was teaching, because once a year, the high priest would go in there, he'd sprinkle the blood of an animal sacrifice, which was a prophecy of the sacrifice of the coming Messiah, and he would put it on the mercy seat over the Ten Commandments, and everyone was forgiven.
Wowzer. Wow.
Now, it's in Jerusalem. It's still there. I know there have been reports of it going down to Ethiopia, to Rome, to Britain, to other places, but they are if anything has gone out, it's copies. The original is still in Jerusalem, under the streets of Jerusalem, about 270 in a cave, about 270 feet north of the Damascus Gate in the old city, and about 20 feet under the ground.
Wow. It's something you've interesting you just said there, Jonathan, and I've only ever heard one other person say that everybody wants to be the one who's located the Ark of the Covenant in all these different zones around the world, but nobody seems to realize there may have been copies, and that's something I've only heard from one other researcher, Jonathan. Great to hear you say that, and I mean it's very realistic. I mean, who's to say there was only one?
Yes.
Where do we sit now, Jonathan? Let's say we have more Jonathan Grays out there, and we all take up the role that you have done, Jonathan. And I say 37 years of what you've been doing, Jonathan, is wonderful to see all the research from all the different aspects of this alternative genre, and it's alternative in labelism only. It should be our mainstream. But let's say we get more Jonathan Grays out there, and we all research these mysteries and historical artifacts and put our minds to it. Do we get to this intellectual civilization of grandeur one more time, or is that the end goal? Is that what we want? Do we want to go back to the sophistication we once had?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I guess that Thomas Edison put it rather nicely when Thomas Edison was involved in inventing of the electric light bulb, ultimately.
Sure, yeah.
And what Thomas Edison said was this. He said, the old inventions have been reinvented.
Wow.
He gave no credit to himself. He simply said, we're just rediscovering what was lost.
Yeah.
And we've rediscovered many, many things from the past, and we're redoing them, perhaps not in the same way. For example, lights are not produced in the same way that they were produced in the ancient, but the result was the same, electric light at night. And until it was destroyed and the civilizations went down. Now, I don't know necessarily whether it's such a good idea to say that our primary aim ought to be to restore everything that was lost technologically. I think our primary aim ought to be that we survive as a civilization and that we make this world a better place to live in.
Sure.
And that, in other words, our spiritual nature must be restored, not necessarily our technology, because it's how we live together and how we acknowledge, first of all, our Creator, and that gives us value for every human being, because if they're created and they're not accidents that can be wiped out, there are people who want to wipe out most of the population so they can enjoy themselves more, and you know that. But if we think of our Creator as being someone who loves us and cares for us, and therefore we should love and care for each other because we're all valuable, then we'll have a much better lifestyle in our families and in our societies and in our nations.
What a wonderful positive response, Jonathan. Yeah, and the key thing is, I think you're right, a blend of spirituality and science. You know, it's not a bad thing. I think we're at that point now, Jonathan, where we see that amalgamation of science and spirituality, a reunion, if you will. I think we're at that point. Do you think that is the tipping point we need to get to, this where we see this paradigm change? It's not going to happen.
Oh, yes. We do need to see this change, absolutely. And we'll all be better off if we do.
How far down that road of a paradigm change do you think we're at, Jonathan? Do you think the internet age has really brought us so far forward in the last 20 years with research and information at our fingertips? Do you think we're heading there? Do you think we're just on the tip?
Well, the internet is a wonderful invention and very precious to all of us, I'm sure. I'm not sure that we're going to survive. There's another world war coming, and all the system is wiped out. Whether we mightn't go back to living a more primitive style, but whatever it is, I do think that we've got to focus on the best of each for each other, and we could avoid being wiped out. But of course, you know, human nature hasn't changed, and the world is not better. No, morally, and as far as war and pain and death and hatred and revenge and jealousy and so on, our world is not a lot worse than it was 10 years ago. It's not getting better, and this is the problem. We need every one of us individually to look at our own lives. And I think if every person in the world, 7 billion people, did that, what a beautiful world we'd have.
Sure. You know, I'm a dreamer, Jonathan. I like to think of ancient Egypt and the Fibonacci spirals and all the sophisticated philosophy they had and the mathematics. And I'd love to see a world again where we use the Fibonacci and golden mean in all our buildings. And I know, and that would be wonderful. But you're right. You know, if we don't address this situation of multiple wars raging and bring in humanitarianism, it's going to be all in vain.
Yes, you've hit the nail on the head, James.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'm going to wrap it up at that. It's been such an honour and a pleasure listening to you today and indulging in your research. Of course, we've been listening to today's author, Jonathan Gray. His website is beforeus.com. You got to check out this guy's work. He's been at this for 37 years and provided such a wealth of information. Jonathan, I really thank you for your time. It's been such an honour.
Thank you, James, for having me. It's been a great pleasure and joy to be with you. That I thought would be of interest, and I began to find things that I didn't expect, whether it be South America or Asia or Europe, Africa, wherever. There came up anomalies, things that, as you mentioned, shouldn't exist. I saw an out-of-place artifact here, an out-of-place piece of knowledge here, and they just didn't fit our traditional view of history. So I just pushed them aside because I couldn't include them. They just didn't make sense. But then so many of them began to surface, and I thought, well, wait a minute. What's happening here? There shouldn't be all these things that don't fit our view of history. And so I just stopped the project I was doing. I began looking to see if these were just one or two, or whether there were more of them. And eventually hundreds and thousands of these began to surface. And this to me was just so compelling. I could not carry on with the traditional view of history. I had to really see why these other things were here. What caused them? How come we've forgotten about them? And a pattern began to develop that if something was found, like ever-burning lights were found in South America, it wasn't just South America, it was Asia, Africa, and Europe and other places. And then I began to look at machinery, ancient medical knowledge, and various subjects began to present themselves until there was so much evidence on each one of them that this required a book of a different nature totally. And this was the origin of the book Dead Men's Secrets. And this actually took out about 1,000, just over 1,000 of these ancient anomalies. We couldn't just put them all in because it would just be too big. But that's enough to present a strong, solid case that there was a global pattern which was the same worldwide on all continents for ancient knowledge of. It doesn't matter what sphere you go to, the knowledge was there, and a lot of it was put into practice.
Oh, wow, Jonathan. You know, we're going to get into all this, Jonathan. Tell me the bit I don't read about in the bio. Tell me who you are, Jonathan. Are you a passionate guy, a very logical guy? Do you seek mystery, or do you seek the logical and let the mystery?
But when you find that other people get their answers, well, this makes it all worthwhile to me. I can go to bed at night saying, okay, I've done some good in the world today.
Wow. Okay, John, let's talk the biggest thing, we can talk some artifacts and some specifics in a moment, but I guess the big question of all, you know, if we have this vanished civilization, or we've had technology go down in the past, the big question is, what happened to them? Do we have a time frame?
Oh, yes, we do. And I should mention that I've produced 2 books on the big dating blunder, which is persistent around the world. Our traditional dating methods are just like the traditional history. They're both outdated and they're both wrong. Mm-hmm. So the dating has to be revised according to evidence. Now, the greatest evidence that we have is not from dating of artifacts by carbon dating. Carbon dating is only reliable up to 3,500 years. And that is actually testified by the man who gained a Nobel Prize for his carbon dating discovery. He said you cannot go back with certainty beyond the first dynasty of Egypt. So that's about 4,000 years.
Wow.
Now, likewise, all of the radiometric dating systems are dependent upon certain assumptions, and those assumptions have now been falsified. And yet the books all go back and say, so 40,000 years ago the Aborigines were in Australia. And 100,000 years ago, this person was doing this in Africa, and so on. I now am prepared to declare, without fear of being successfully contradicted, that all those datings are nonsense. The furthest we can go back is correctly stated by Libby, who was involved in the carbon dating, and he said that you cannot go back with certainty beyond the first dynasty of Egypt. Anything else is speculation. Human records only go back about that far too, a little bit further. And when you go to human records, you have eyewitness reports, and that's much more reliable than something that we guess at by something that is not sustainable as far as scientific dating is concerned. Now,
everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I'm delighted to be talking to today's guest. It's my favorite topic of ancient history, ancient mysteries. And, wow, we've got a veteran of this genre today, because we're going to get into his latest book as well, which is Dead Men's Secrets. We're going to be talking to today's author, Jonathan Gray. A little bit of bio before I bring him on, and I'll get Jonathan to expand on it. He is an international explorer, archaeologist, and author, as I say, traveled the world many times over in search of data on ancient mysteries. And the past 37 years, he's penetrated some largely unexplored areas too, including the Amazon, leading expeditions to the bottom of the sea and remote mountain and desert regions, covering serious terrain. And of course, all of Jonathan's explorations, the evidence has been surprising but out-of-place artifacts, something Jonathan is specialised in, I believe. According to that, what we've all been taught in school, these are not possible items, they shouldn't even exist, and that they're just isolated anomalies, but we're going to get into why that is so. Global pattern to see then is that these are all suggesting an ancient worldwide civilization of astonishing, gigantic proportions, and something we've covered many times on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have today's guest on the show today to get into this subject, and by a mile, Jonathan has put such a prolific research together on this whole subject. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Jonathan. You're very welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. It's good speaking with you.
Wow, great to have you here live today in New Zealand via Ireland. Wow, we're on opposite sides of the globe here, brother. Jonathan, I guess, like everybody, tell me why you get into this whole genre. This is something did you find your answers were lacking to, mysteries that you were seeking? Did you feel the need to collaborate all this data together? Is that why you got into this genre?
Well, as a matter of fact, James, I used to accept the traditional view of history, and in fact, I was about to write a book on that theme, and so I began my own research independently, and over 30 countries or more, I began to collect information and be passionate about it, because there are big institutions of learning. And I'm going to name one, the Smithsonian in the United States.
Oh yeah,
has at least a dozen large museums scattered across the country, and the founder of the Smithsonian actually was an honest man who was so excited about the past that he just wanted to gather all the physical evidence he could and present it to the public just as it was, and let it go where it has to go, and not with any theories behind it, but if something is found, we'll just put it there. And he was a very honourable man, and he built up a great reputation for the Smithsonian as a wonderful institution of learning and of displaying that learning to the public. But this later on was hijacked by a group of men who had an agenda. And they then said, okay, we want to prove our point to the public, and to do so we will invent things if we have to, and we'll destroy other things that go against it if we have to. Mm-hmm. And this is now the sad story of such a wonderful institution that has gone bad.
Wow, well said, Jonathan, well said. Jonathan, what I love about your work is how you assimilate the data, because it's a very convoluted story, that of the human, the humans on this planet. It's a very mixed bag. There's like you say, there's like geographical information, astronomical information, mathematical, metallurgical. It just keeps on going. It's like, how do you assimilate that data? But I like the way you've done that, Jonathan. You've categorized it in a way that's needed. How do you go about the complexity of the data that you're looking at? Because it's very, very wide.
Yes, well, when I find something, in the back of my mind always is, how am I going to share this? Half of the joy of finding something is when you know that there are going to be lots of people out there whose lives are going to be helped, and they're going to be excited, they're going to enjoy the knowledge. And I guess I get more joy out of sharing it with others than of just keeping it to myself. You just keep something to yourself, and well, what's it worth?
Have fun. I mean, build a picture for the audience, Jonathan.
Yes. Well, of course, when I see a mystery, when I see something that can't be explained, I have an insatiable desire to get to the bottom of it. Like a detective, when he sees things happening that shouldn't be happening, he stops everything and he goes on the trail to see how it happened, where it happened, why it happened, who was involved, and so on. Mm-hmm. And this is how cases are developed by detectives. Now, in archaeology, the same thing exists. We see things that we didn't expect to happen. So, okay, why did they happen? Who did them? Where did they happen? If they got covered up, who did the covering up? Why are we seeing so much opposition to the findings of these things? And this opens up a real can of worms in some directions. So it includes everything. It includes the ancient knowledge. It includes modern suppression. It includes fact and fiction. And I want the facts, not the fiction. I want the answers, not the questions. Each question must be answered, and that's my nature, actually, to find the answers to things. And if I can't find the answer, then I will not stop until either the answer is not available or else the answer is there. And in most cases, you find the answer if you keep going.
Wow. Yeah, you can hear the passion come through, Jonathan. Jonathan, there's so many books you have written now. It's quite a long endurance seeking of the truth that you've gone through. And like I say, a lot of people would focus on the cover-up, or a lot of people would focus on the ancient technology or ancient spirituality or ancient civilization, and that's fine. I mean, that's great. Jonathan, you have covered the spectrum here. It's prolific, the work that you have done. I mean, great to have you on the show today. What would be the main genre that you would find excites you the most, or the one genre that you think is the most revelation? What appeals to you to most? What one has the biggest revelation, or what one, or can you even say that?
Well, I would say that today the attempts to cover up and destroy evidence is what gets